Welcome to the Capture Consulting Offers Case Workshop Introductory video. The purpose of this video is to establish some foundational points about the case interview that is regularly used in management consulting interviews and also frequently and increasingly used in corporate interviews. The information that I'm going to present is a culmination of a number of different things that help to understand what a case interview is, what it's trying to assess, how it's used, and some of the preparation elements that might be beneficial to reference in advance of the case workshop. As we begin, let me just introduce myself briefly. My name is Pam Schilling, and I am an MBA from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Many years ago, I pursued management consulting when I was finishing business school, and as a part of that process, I interviewed successfully with a number of consulting firms. And over the course of my career, there were two things where I was heavily involved in case interviews myself. One, actually sitting on the other side of the table interviewing students as part of the recruiting and interviewing process. Secondly, after my first consulting experience, I moved to two different consulting firms and had some ongoing experiences interviewing and conducting case interviews, ultimately culminating in my role with Booz & Company, which is now Strategy and a part of PricewaterhouseCoopers. After several years in consulting and really enjoying that experience, I decided to refocus my attention, and I focus on student development today, both in the classroom and also as a career coach. And so what this means is that over the course of my career, I've helped thousands of students prepare for consulting interviews, and particularly conducting case interview preparation, mock case interviews, and working with a number of schools to help prepare the right foundation and fundamentals. So I think some of my background will be very helpful, and what I aim to do is to provide insights about the hiring process and assessment, and then some of the best practices in actually conducting a case interview. For our sessions, there's going to be two different sessions that we're holding. The first is the case workshop itself. This is about understanding the key elements of a case interview, what is the approach that's necessary, and the type of analysis that goes on in a successful case interview. And then we're going to do some specific drill down on using hypotheses, developing structure, and making sure that the right fundamentals are in place to have a successful case interview. So that's the first session. The second type of session is actually taking all of that information and knowledge and putting it into practice. So we're going to be holding several different case practice sessions where there are activities, both quantitative math practice as well as some of the case start, which is hypothesis and structure. So by the end of this, hopefully you'll have a really good foundation for continuing your case preparation and practice as interviews approach. What I want to do is just spend a couple of minutes laying out some of the background for case interviews, what they are, what's assessed, some of that foundational information, and this will lead us into the actual case workshop session where we begin to talk about how to actually perform and analyze in a case interview. So beginning, what in fact is a case interview? It's probably something that many of you have gotten some familiarity with, heard about, read about, but just so that we're all on the same page, this is a very different type of an interview. You actually have to sit down real time and solve a problem that's presented to you in the moment. It's typically 45 minutes. There's a business situation, and you as the candidate have to explore that problem, do some analysis, and at the end, conclude, suggest some recommendations that'll help solve that problem. The expectation is that you're going to logically structure the problem, ask great questions, do some analysis, create conclusions, articulate recommendations, and then you're doing this with the presence of a consultant. It's not easy for sure. Why is it not easy? Well, it's stressful. There's no doubt about that. You can't use any notes. You can't reference your calculator, a spreadsheet, no looking at things on the internet. It's just you and your thinking. Why do consulting firms do this? Well, it really truly is a simulation of what the job is. If you have what it takes to do the job, you can demonstrate it in a 45-minute case interview. Here are just a couple of examples of a number of questions that could be asked, but I've picked out 3. There's certainly an infinite set of options, but for example, what would a spice division of a major food manufacturer do if they've had flat or declining sales and profits over the past 5 years? What should the company do to improve its performance? A second type of a question. Your friend is thinking about taking their business degree and becoming an entrepreneur. In fact, there's a hot dog stand that they regularly see in downtown Toronto. It's in a busy area, often has a long line. Your friend thinks maybe they should buy it. How would you evaluate this decision, and what would maybe be the maximum price that you would want to pay? A third question. You're advising the new dean of Stanford Business School. If you've read a little bit of information, Stanford is going to be looking for a new dean and has had some challenges with the outgoing dean. What would you highlight as the key issues and challenges for that new dean, and how would you recommend handling them? So again, an infinite potential set of questions that you could be asked in an interview. These are just but a few. So when the case interview is assessed, what is your interviewer looking for? Well, fundamentally, they're looking at your problem-solving skills. Many times these questions are real client problems and challenges. So what's looked at in your work is how you can structure a tough and often very ambiguous problem. Can you focus on the high priority issues? Do you have comfort and ability to work with facts and data and then determine the implications? This is both qualitative and quantitative. Analysis is not purely quantitative in numbers. Can you then create conclusions and recommendations to solve that core problem? And can you communicate your thinking clearly in a very fast setting? 45 minutes goes very quickly. The thing to keep in mind is that many times there's not one right answer that the interviewer is looking for. What they're trying to understand and assess is your approach, how you solve the case, not just getting the right answer, which is often called cracking the case. There's numerous pieces of information that you can be researching online, regardless of the type of consulting firm or the specific consulting firms that you may be interviewing with. Over the course of the coming weeks, I encourage you to go out and do this research. Many of the large consulting firms have fantastic resources. They have very deep insights, information, and preparation about the case interview. Yes, some of them are specific to their firm, but I would say that in general, they give you a very good overview of what a case interview is looking for in general. I've just provided a few examples here from some of the largest consulting firms, the ones that are recruiting the largest number of MBAs and candidates in general. I think if you review these insights from firms like Bain and the Boston Consulting Group and Deloitte and McKinsey as a starting point, and then continue based on the firms that you may be particularly targeting, you're going to find this very valuable. So what is the big picture about the case interview assessment? There's several things that I want you to keep in mind. First of all, I'm looking for some integration of a couple of things in your overall approach to solving the case. And we're going to be talking about this as we drill down into actually how to solve a case. The first is theory, using the MBA knowledge and the business knowledge that you've developed in the classroom. That's actually an important foundation. Secondly, how do you bring in your real-world knowledge? Everyone has experience. You have observations, you have work experience, you have things that you read. You're a consumer. You do things online in your daily activities. You engage with the business world around us. Integrating that can be very valuable. The third thing is analytics. And how do you work with data and information? Sometimes you have a ton of information and you have to sift through it. Other times you lack information and you have to be able to find ways to do analysis in that environment that we call ambiguity. The next element is your pragmatism. The ideas that you're coming up with and the recommendations, are they feasible? Is it something that the client could implement? And then finally, there's a dimension of creativity. Of course, clients want consultants to come up with ideas that no one's ever thought of before. That's the whole point of hiring consultants. So do you have that element of creativity? And sometimes creativity is actually very simple. It's just a new idea or new way of thinking. The second element of your case interview that can be incredibly valuable is to bring this idea of reality to the interview. You're sitting down and you're solving a problem, and you should do that as if it was your job and you were working with a real client. If you try as much as you can to take away the interview dimension and make this a discussion with a colleague, it really sets a very different tone for your interview. The third dimension then is structure. Always remaining structured throughout the entire interview. Going back to your original structure, that's tremendously important. And then just continuing to have a logical path for solving the case. The next dimension is communication. You'll see this a lot in the reading about case interviews. There's an idea of answering first. This is something that's very common in consulting speak, if you will. State the answer and then explain how you got there. The final dimension is logic, having criteria and rationale for any of the conclusions that you make. You think that something has an idea of a root cause. You state that root cause and then you state why you think that. This is particularly important when we get to the conclusion part of a case interview. Also for your reference, I've summarized here what can be thought of as a framework for thinking about the various case interview topics. There's really three things I think that come into play. The first are a numerous set of different types of business problems or business challenges. These are things that range from increasing sales or market share to improving profit to looking at HR and organizational matters and change management and post-merger integration. So the typical things that we would think of as business people and the type of challenges that businesses have. These are often the main topics of your cases. But secondly, there are some math and some logic and reasoning type of cases. The math problems might involve estimating or market sizing or some other type of quantitative problem. And then logic and reasoning, it could be a brain teaser, some alternative type of estimate or guesstimate, and then one-liners, which are very short. If you were on a desert island and could only bring one thing, what would it be? So it's helpful to have this awareness because, again, you can't predict the type of case that the interviewer is going to come at you with. Additionally, something that I think is very valuable as you're beginning your preparation and continuing forward is to be referencing the main MBA frameworks or the main business frameworks that form the foundation for your case solving and the content that goes into cases. Again, the case is testing your theoretical background, your business acumen. So if you can take some of these main topics, these main business frameworks and topics, and summarize them and have them as your approach and review understanding, that can be very valuable. So there are essentially 6 main topics that come into cases. Again, there can be others, but if I look at the majority, it's these 6 topics. The first is around accounting. And accounting is something that it might seem very odd that a consulting firm that's solving business problems might be looking at. But accounting serves as some of the analytic foundation. So you're not going to be looking at debits and credits, but it's some of the more analytic, decision-oriented parts of accounting. So things like an understanding of a balanced scorecard, the break-even calculation, knowing the key points of financial statements such as gross profit and earnings per share, those sorts of things. and in general, the main financial drivers for businesses that improve profitability particularly. Also, having a good view of some of the core ratios can be very helpful. Some of the main ones I would highlight include gross margin, net profit margin, and then some of the return calculations like return on assets, return on equity, return on investment. Those are just a nice backdrop, and a lot of the quantitative parts of cases reference some of that content. Then next, we have economics. Certainly, microeconomics is a huge part of cases, understanding supply and demand, price elasticity, and some of the fundamentals of pricing. And then there's also some things at the macroeconomic dimension that can be valuable. Knowing macroeconomic factors and what are the types of things that influence the macroeconomy. And it's not bad to have a good review of what components make up GDP. In the finance area, I'll tell you that it's not typical that you're going to be doing an in-depth financial analysis. You won't necessarily do something like a discounted cash flow or a net present value calculation. That would be very hard because you don't have a calculator to determine a discounted cash flow analysis because of the discount rate. But the foundations and how to approach those analyses are important. Knowing how to do valuations. What's the difference between cash and profit? How would you come up with free cash flow? An overall understanding of a terminal value. And then some of the core components of M&A, both strategically and how you might look at some type of value for a merger integration. In the marketing front, there's a number of different things. Marketing is actually a really important area in case interviews and case studies themselves. So thinking about segmentation and profiling of customers, thinking about market share, and then the overall marketing mix, that's a really great place to start. In the operations area, I think one of the main things is around supply chain theory and also being able to think about supply chains and what helps a company bring their product to market and all the different processes that are involved. And of course, in case interviews, there's also a number of different strategy frameworks. I've just listed a handful here. There's many different dimensions that you can be referencing from some of your competitive strategy and other strategic management courses. Thinking about market entry, thinking about how to drive competitive advantage, the pestle analysis, which relates to macroeconomic factors, Porter's 5 forces, a value chain analysis, and then there's also a number of change management and organizational frameworks that could be useful to you. So the idea is prepare your summaries of these frameworks. Use them as reference tools as you're planning and preparing for your case interviews. That will be a very great and valuable time spent because it'll help you with all of those theoretical foundations. Next, there's a dimension of the case style and the delivery approach that consulting firms use. There are many different ways that you're going to receive a case interview and have to work through it. This is just something that's good as background. You can get much more of this insight as you talk to specific firms. But the high level is most case interviews are self-directed, where the interviewer gives you the case and then you have to take control of the steering wheel and walk through solving that case. In contrast, in the upper left quadrant is the interviewer-led style. This is done as a case technique where I propose really one question at a time, and I, as the interviewer, I really guide you through the case. Another variation of a case interview is the written case. This is in the upper right quadrant. This is becoming more and more popular by the consulting firms and other organizations. You actually get case materials in advance, you have some time to prepare, and then you have to come into your interview setting with some type of summary and be prepared to answer questions. Another variation of the written case is actually a team case. So rather than doing everything on your own, you're working with 1, 2, or 3 other individuals. And the idea is to see how you can interact together and then jointly present the case, showing that each of you has a contribution. And then finally, in the lower left quadrant, we have different types of topics, but one of them could be focused Q&A. What that means is that I might, as an interviewer, pick a specific topic off of your resume, and then I propose a very focused question, and I essentially turn it into the case interview. You just never know exactly what an interview is going to do. However, generally, you can get an understanding of these different types of case styles based on the firm that you're going to be interviewing with. So your research there becomes very important. As we go into the case workshop, this case solving approach is what we're really going to drill down on. There are 3 steps in solving a case. The first is the case start. This is really known also as the structure. Then there's a large part of the case, which is spent on solving. And then before you wrap up the case interview, you're going to be concluding. So during the case workshop, we're going to drill down on each one of these steps and talk about what they mean and how you focus your analysis and how you move the case along. I've also got kind of a high level, if you will, case interview flow. And this is just something that we'll continue to reference. But as you go through the case, it really moves from the facts of the case to a set of high impact questions, and then you developing your hypotheses and structure about the case. That step is really one of the most important. Then in step 4, that stage involves conducting a number of different types of analysis. This is where you're applying the information, some of your business acumen, asking more questions, doing analysis, sometimes quantitative, sometimes qualitative, and then trying to synthesize each one of those branches of analysis to form mini conclusions. And then at the end of the case, you really bring it all together. You go back and solve the original answer to the case, stating what your conclusion is, what your recommendations are, and then any considerations going forward. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, there are a number of case resources that you can be referencing online. Again, I've summarized here some of the larger firms because they tend to have a lot more material than some of the smaller, more boutique consulting firms. I would encourage you again throughout your case preparation to be referencing these firm materials. They have videos, they have practice cases, and these are the type of materials where I would review beginning, middle, and end of your preparation. I would take a look at some of the tips early on. I probably would save some of the practice cases towards the latter part of your preparation. The practice cases that these firms present, they're challenging. They're often second round cases, and they're a little bit tough to tackle early in your preparation. So I might save them towards the end when you've gotten some good preparation under your belt. I'm going to conclude by just reinforcing what comes next. For the case core, we're going to begin to drill down on the various elements of solving a case during an interview. We're going to reinforce what case interviewers are looking for. We're going to take each of the components of the case solving approach to work through a case and probe further, discuss what you should be trying to achieve, as well as practicing a few of the techniques. We're going to conclude the session by watching a video which shows a case interview end to end with an opportunity for us to discuss what we think about that case performance. Then we'll move on to the case catalyst, which is the next activity. These are going to be a set of small group as well as partner activities to do market sizing, structuring, hypothesis development, and working through a case end to end. Thank you for taking a few minutes to watch this introductory video for the case workshops. Please enjoy the next step. The Capture Consulting offers Case Core.